CSG gets data protection. Is Intel's CEO in or out? AI profit sharing. Dial-up has some hangups, and we're going to take a look at the resignation of GitHub CEO in this episode of the Tech Field Day Rundown. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tech Field Day Rundown. Today is August the 13th, and we're hoping that you're enjoying today with a nice glass of some bubbly alcohol because it's National Prosecco Day. But if you don't drink, treat yourself to a filet mignon because it's National Filet Mignon Day. It's almost like those two things go together, sort of. But what goes together is us here at the Rundown with the news, maybe a little bit of snark. We'll see what happens. But together with me this week is my good friend, Chris Grundemann. Chris, welcome to the Rundown this week.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, we're very happy that you could jump in and co-host with us today. It's been an exciting week in the news, and there's a lot of stuff going on. I think we might have a few opinions about it. We'll have to dive in and see what happens. We're going to kick off, though, with an acquisition because Cloud Software Group, also known as CSG, is going to acquire data protection company Arctera later this year using cash on hand. Arctera, which spun out of Veritas after Cohesity acquired them in 2023, serves tens of thousands of customers, including most of the names that you'd recognize from the Fortune 100, and earns over $400 million annually. Its products that you no doubt have heard of, like Backup Exec, InfoScale, and Insight Platform, add compliance, resiliency, and security features to CSG's analytics and management tools, which addresses growing cybersecurity and privacy demands. Formed in 2022 from the merger of Citrix and Tibco, CSG has been expanding its enterprise software portfolio and plans more acquisitions of mission-critical solutions. Chris, do you think CSG buying into the data protection market is going to give them a leg up on their competition?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously they think so. And this really, to me, marks a continuation of the consolidation we're seeing in the cybersecurity market. It seems like the last few years, this has been ramping up. We've seen more and more purchases and acquisitions and mergers along these lines. As you mentioned, right, CSG was formed in 2022 when Citrix and Tibco came together. Those who might not know, Tibco is itself a data management and analytics vendor. Since then, they've added in a few other brands, Information Builders, which is a data quality platform, Spotfire, a data analytics platform, and JasperSoft, which I think does generate report generation. They also own cloud.com for all those domainers out there. So Arctera adds additional data protection capabilities to this family of companies that makes a lot of sense, right? Krista Case from Futurum Group has commented on this addition of data management capabilities across compliance, resilience, and protection is a natural fit. And in addition to that, it also exposes CSG to Arctera and probably broader Veritas from before the spinoff customers, right? I think what's really interesting here, though, in this particular acquisition is that Arctera's platform, which was called the Data Compliance Platform, I think now it's called Insight, it recently expanded its capabilities to support large language model logging and protection, which seems very timely indeed. So this acquisition is expected to close in the fourth quarter of 2025. As you said, it's going to be cash, but we don't know how much. And we do know that CEO Tom Cross has said that CSG is planning on making more acquisitions. So this isn't the end. In other big company news, Donald Trump has urged Intel CEO Lip-Bu Tan to resign, citing alleged conflicts tied to his investments in Chinese tech companies, though he gave no specifics. The call follows Senator Tom Cotton's warning about Tan's ties to China and past leadership at Cadence Design System, which violated U.S. export controls. Tan, who was appointed in March, is steering Intel through cost cuts and has cautioned that it may drop next-gen chipmaking without a key customer. Intel, the only U.S. producer of advanced semiconductors, has received billions in subsidies, but trails TSMC. Neither Intel nor the White House commented, although I do believe today they may be backing away from this a little bit. On the announcement, shares of Intel fell 3%. Tom, is this a real security concern for the U.S., or is this Trump's famous deal-making in action?
So I'm going to give you the shot and then I'm going to give you the chaser. So stay tuned. Here's the shot. This is stupid. Sorry, that's my professional opinion. This is stupid. You just announced that you were going to put a 100% tariff on any company who's not making chips domestically. Never mind the fact that TSMC is opening plants in Arizona to specifically get around this. We know that. Intel is the only manufacturer of chips domestically. And then you call for the resignation of their CEO over what exactly? The fact that he worked with a Chinese company? Good luck finding people that haven't. That's the problem, is that almost everybody in this industry has worked either for a Chinese company or a Chinese company subsidiary in a business sense for quite a while. In fact, I would argue that the reason why a lot of the CEOs that don't make it in the industry aren't making it is because they're not working where that's happening. I mean, look at a lot of those domestic companies that you love so much. They either have people on the board or people who are in management who have some ties to China or, something along those lines. So why would you cut off your own nose to spite your face? Yes, we have reported over the last few weeks that there are problems that Intel is having, that they are basically kind of turning the ship, as it were. They realize that foundries are not an immediate panacea for their problems. They're going to take investment. Those CHIPS Act funds come with some strings, and now they're looking at the real possibility that they may not get to stick around long enough to enjoy the fruits of those labors. I was listening to a video that was recorded by Gamers Nexus here recently where they pulled no punches in saying that this is a huge problem for Intel. And those are the folks that are working on it from the video graphics side. These are not enterprises. Now, all that being said, here's the chaser. Lip Bhutan went to the White House on Monday, and suddenly, after having a closed-door meeting with the president says he's an okay guy. President says it's all cool. Intel stock jumped 3% on the news. So I wonder, what was said behind that closed door that could possibly make the president of the United States, who's notorious for sticking to his guns on every decision that he makes, suddenly about face? I wonder if it has anything to do with the other big news that was coming out this week from the competitors to Intel. Let's analyze that, Chris, because I want to hear your thoughts on the fact that NVIDIA and AMD are going to be sharing 15% of their Chinese revenue with the U.S. government in return for licenses to sell the H20 and MI308 chips there. You may recall those chips were specifically banned from being sold to Chinese markets. Of course, everyone's favorite president brokered this deal. It's quite unusual because I can't remember in recent memory when a corporation paid the US government a cut of their profits. But it is highly beneficial because it lets both companies keep a foothold in the Chinese market and avoids letting them lose ground to companies like Huawei. Although there is the possibility there could be future levies. The agreement highlights the strategic importance of semiconductors while leaving China torn between its need for advanced chips and its frustration over added costs and political concerns. I will also note that in a news article released this week, China says they don't want the H20 anywhere near any of their sensitive government data for some reason or another. So, Chris, I have to ask, given what happened with Intel and given this news, do you think it's bribery like I do?
Well, the only good thing about this potential bribery is that the money is going to the government and not, at least what we've seen publicly, into any individual pockets, right? So this 15% is going to be paid into the U.S. It's basically a tax. I guess it's not really a tariff since it's not being levied at the board. It's for exports, not imports. But anyway, there is money coming into the U.S. for this. And it probably at least helps NVIDIA and AMD, right? So if you look at the NVIDIA case in particular, last quarter, I think they said that they lost somewhere between like $4.5 and $5.5 billion on not being able to sell H20 chips into China. And Jensen Huang came out and said this is going to cost us over the next 2 or 3 years $50 billion. So I'm sure that he is breathing a sigh of relief, and maybe the NVIDIA shareholders as well, that this is going to end up costing quite a bit less. There's a really good chance despite what the Chinese government has said, that the H20 chip is going to grow rapidly in the Chinese market and potentially make up something like 70% of NVIDIA's market share in China fairly rapidly. So even with a 15% tax, tariff, fee, bribe on top of that, it's still going to do quite well for both NVIDIA and their shareholders. And as you said, this also hopefully moves NVIDIA or continues to move NVIDIA into a place where their chips are being used in AI applications, even in China. I think the outright ban has a potential to split the market, right? Where we see AI development happening completely separately in two different parts of the world. Now, there are other geopolitical concerns here, right? I mean, is this just a money thing where selling the chips matters only because of the money that's going to come back to the US? Or does this matter because selling the chips allows China and their companies to get a foothold up on AI? There's some interesting questions that I don't have answers, whether this is the right move or not from the AI arms race perspective, call it. I do think that, as you mentioned, kind of related back to the Intel thing, that this is probably a sign of things to come. I think there's a pretty good prospect that we will see additional individual company deals with the U.S. government, with the U.S. president. What that means exactly, I'm not sure, but I do think we will see this to continue. Some places where I think some folks might be worried is in smaller organizations. If you're not the CEO of Intel, if you're not running NVIDIA, if you're not running AMD, and you just happen to be beholden to these other big tariffs and you can't find a way to do a deal with the president of the United States to get out of it, what does that mean? What does that mean for our economy? Only something like, I think it's like 20%, 18% of the US population is employed by Fortune 50 companies. So most of us work for smaller businesses that may not have the ability to show up like Tim Cook did with a bar of gold and some glass after making some significant investments in the US to bring Apple back in terms with the president. So the fallout here could be widespread. It's also possible that we'll just all get rich off of NVIDIA stock because they can now sell the H20 into China. Lots to be determined there. One thing that is not going to be determined anymore because it has been is that AOL will end its dial-up internet service on September 30th, 2025, closing a chapter in internet history that began in 1991. The shutdown also ends related software like the AOL Dialer and the AOL Shield browser. While largely obsolete, dial-up still had about 265,000 US users in 2019, the most recent data I have here. Many of them were sticking with it out of habit, some fear of losing access to familiar services. For others, ending their subscription was an emotional step. Even after switching to broadband, they hang on to that AOL connection, maybe remembering the nostalgic sounds that it made when they first dialed up. This move definitely marks both the end of that nostalgic era and also a broader shift away from older online models. Tom, what does this mean for broadband generally and maybe technology and specifically? Are we putting things to bed too soon, or is this the right move at the right time?
Well, I've done the math, Chris, and I figured out that by September 30th, I will just about be out of those 1,000 free hours that I got from Intel, which is great because I hate letting things go to waste. This news was kind of interesting because I'm sure, just like a lot of people out there, someone went, "Wait, AOL still offered dial-up," which was then quickly followed by, "Wait, AOL is still in business." By the way, they were sold off to Verizon along with the rest of the Yahoo thing. For those of you who may remember the heady days of AOL Time Warner owning damn near everything, and now we're at like, oh yeah, they're still around. Most of the people who were subscribing to the service, those 200,000 something people, I think actually the latest report says that it's down under 200,000 now. They're stodgy. They're probably older folks who don't like change. AOL's comforting, right? It's everything you need at your fingertips. Even if you go to like your AOL newsfeed now, it's basically a Yahoo newsfeed with yellow all over it. But I think that one of the reasons why it was still floated the way that it was that there was revenue to be made from having a portal. Like we all remember the days of your homepage being set to Yahoo or AOL or CompuServe, Prodigy or whatever. And you did all your work there, and very rarely did you escape out into the wider internet. I can still remember I made the choice for CompuServe because it made the most sense to me. but downloading NCSA Mosaic for the very first time and using it to go outside of CompuServe. And I feel like a lot of people have that same opinion about AOL. There's the kinds of people who are still on dial-up are the kinds of people that think that you still need to use AOL to access the internet to be able to check your AOL email, not knowing that it's been webmail for years. And finally, it got to the point where the amount of money they were making off the portal did not equate to the amount of money that they're making, that's costing them to keep the system up. But another thing that you need to consider here is the fact that traditional carriers are dumping their local loop access as quickly as possible. This is something that I've been tracking for quite a while in the telecom industry, is that companies like AT&T and Verizon have been mandated for years to provide 911 access to households. And the way that they do that is they bundle up their, rural telephone access and they sell it off to a company. And then that way they can say they're partnering with those companies to provide that access, but they're not taking on the debts and the maintenance costs for those local loops because they're still pretty outdated. But we live in a world now where most people have a cell phone for one reason or another. And the idea of having a home phone is kind of quaint and archaic. And that means there's no money in maintaining those lines anymore because you're not getting those fat, wonderful subscriber fees from them. So, what to do? Well, I would like to divest that crap as much as possible if I was a phone company that was paying for not very much profit. And that means that the services that use that are going to slowly go away. And that's not just AOL dial up, that's things like fire alarms that are, using traditional telephone lines. So, there could be a bigger story here. However, I don't think the people who are using AOL are going to know anything about it. Um, Maybe there's a rural ISP that they can use that has some kind of a WISP. I don't know if we can teach them how to tether off of their phone. It's going to be tough. If only there was someone to tell me that I've got mail to make it all better. We had a story that we wanted to take a closer look at this week because it could potentially have some big implications for development at large. Microsoft is going to be making GitHub part of its CoreAI team after GitHub CEO Thomas Dohmke announced that he is going to be leaving to get back into the startup game, according to his press release. Dohmke is going to stay on at Microsoft until the end of 2025 to help with the transition. You're probably wondering to yourself, well, man, GitHub is a huge thing. I wonder who they're going to get to take over as CEO for this crown jewel of their product offerings. Well, they're not. The Microsoft team has decided that rather than keeping GitHub kind of off on its own, they're going to be moving it under Microsoft's AI group, which is led by Jay Parikh. This move shows that Microsoft has a plan to connect GitHub more closely with its AI tools and developer platform as they go all out on AI. But it has a lot of people in the industry very concerned about what would happen to a platform that's so universally loved like GitHub if suddenly it becomes an AI factory. Chris, what do you think is going on here?
I think that people are right. I think it's really interesting to think about this. I mean, so just contextualizing this move in some ways, at least in my head, the way I think about it, right, is that Git was actually created in 2005 by Linus Torvalds, who was most famous for creating Linux, or some people call it Linus, in honor of his name. But Linux, and so Git was created as a place to be able to maintain the Linux source code because license for BitKeeper had been, like, the non-commercial license for BitKeeper was removed. And so out of necessity, Linus and team created Git. Now, then a few years after that, some other folks came along and built GitHub to make it a little bit easier to use. And by about 2011, this was the place, beating out SourceForge and a bunch of others, to put your open source code. In 2018, people started to freak out a little bit when Microsoft came in and bought GitHub. But honestly, it didn't really make that big much of a difference. I think people have continued to use GitHub. Microsoft kind of stayed out of the way, let it operate independently. People haven't been too worried about the ownership by Microsoft. That may all change right now, 20 years after the invention of Git, because, as you said, they are intentionally moving the entire GitHub organization underneath their AI org, right? Which signals pretty loudly, I think, that they probably have been and definitely will be using this code themselves for training as much as possible. This is something that Microsoft has already done. We've seen this with LinkedIn, where again, same kind of thing, right? The original acquisition caused some people to get a little bit worried. Then over time, they said, "Oh no, it just works. It's all fine." And now I believe we're fairly certain that Microsoft is using this data to train AI models. Now, this obviously isn't just Microsoft. It is now fairly apparent that Elon Musk bought Twitter for the data to create AI models. This has been going on and on and on. Other folks didn't even buy companies. They just went out and took the data off the internet to train their AI models. So this is something that's definitely part of the zeitgeist right now. I do think it could have a fairly significant chilling effect on the open source community and their use of GitHub. Now, that said, maybe no one cares anymore. Maybe everyone's fine sharing their code with the AI overlords, and it won't have an effect. I think that we will see some fallout, though. What do you think, Tom?
How dare you besmirch the vibe coding community by saying that code has to be uploaded somewhere and isn't generated by a programmatic interface? Yeah, I got nothing there. I agree with you. This is a problem. I can remember the alarm bells going off when Microsoft bought Git, and that was like an $8 billion acquisition. And people are like, what are you going to do with GitHub? Because you can't run ads on it. I mean, you kind of can, but like, where's the value? And they mollified them a little bit at first by saying, no, it's going to be run independently. We're gonna let them do their thing, and we're just happy to be associated with it. And I know several people who worked as community developers over there and worked with the community to kind of right that ship and make people understand that this was something that Microsoft owned but didn't have a finger in. But you've noticed over the last few years that they keep dipping their toe in the water of AI things. Maybe we're going to add this AI coding assistant to kind of help you do a little extra code generation. Or, we're going to let you have the option to opt in to letting AI scan your repositories. And what happened almost every time? GitHub community got the pitchforks and the torches out and said, we don't want this. This is wrong. This is not the kind of advancement that we are supporting because we're GitHub, damn it. And this is what we do. And I think Microsoft was taking notes, if I'm being completely honest with myself. And they said, okay, we can't ease people into this. So we bide our time, right? We give GitHub its ability to do its thing. And eventually Thomas Dohmke gets bored, because that's what startup people do is they get a nice cushy job at a big company with free bananas in the break room, and then they get bored because there's no hustle anymore. There's no grind. There's no life or death situations about pushing code out the door. And they want to get back to that. Microsoft said, great. That's awesome. We love that for you. You didn't have any plans for what you wanted to do with GitHub after you left, right? Because we have plans. And so they put those plans in place by saying, we're not going to hire a new CEO. We're not going to promote from within. We're going to give it to Jay Parikh, who, if I'm being generous, has a pretty bad reputation in the industry for management of companies. And now we're going to consume all of GitHub. So if I'm someone on the outside looking in, what am I thinking? Anything I upload to GitHub now is going to be munched through, OpenAI, because Microsoft's going to take it. They're going to feed it to the monster. And then what does that mean for my code in the future? There's no attribution. There's no nothing, all of that stuff. It means that I may not want to use GitHub anymore. And then we run into this positive feedback loop, right? Of if I don't want to use GitHub, I'm not going to upload my code there, which means there's fewer submissions being uploaded to GitHub, which means there's fewer data points to be ingested into OpenAI. And then that means eventually there's going to be a trickle of information as opposed to the flood that we have now. The problem, of course, is the same problem that you have when you mentioned Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it today. This is where everybody is. Like GitHub is universal at this point. You can use your GitHub profile page as identity verification for things like PGP keys. You can't recreate GitHub overnight. I'm sorry, folks, you can't. It's just impossible because it's the combination of creating a platform that people want to use and encouraging them to get there. It's the reason why Twitter hasn't disappeared yet. It's because it's where everybody is. With all due deference to places like Thing and Mastodon and Blue Sky and all those other places, Twitter is still where everybody's at. So GitHub has some time. They probably have at least a year, if not more, of kind of coasting on this. But eventually people are going to wake up and they're going to say, I don't quite trust this, unless there are some very bright lines drawn right now. We're not going to be using this to train OpenAI data. We're not going to be using it to do all these other things. We're not going to use it to compete against you. Please continue to use our service. Please continue to pay us to use the service. The question is, would a company like Microsoft come out and say that and mean it?
So there is another potential way to look at this, which is that Microsoft just wants to be the platform for AI. There was a recent dust up, I think it was on X or Twitter or whatever we're calling it, where Elon said something about OpenAI is going to come and eat Microsoft for lunch. And Microsoft's CEO replied by saying that people have been trying to do that for 50 years, and that's the fun of it. And then went on to say, I'm excited for Grok 4 on Azure and looking forward to Grok 5, which seems like a really playful way of saying, hey, you're still using Microsoft. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to completely, just train on all of the code that's on GitHub. But also doesn't mean that they're going to do anything nefarious. Maybe just having that there and being able to train on it, maybe that does lead to Microsoft just being this kind of more open than they have been in the past platform for AI where all comers can get the benefit. Not sure.
I'm not sure either. And the altruism behind just wanting to be the platform and the place where everybody goes is the optimistic solution. But I also see how a lot of places that build the platform or the place where everybody wants to go suddenly start trying to find ways to monetize that platform after a while. And that doesn't always work out for people. I can tell you what does work out for people. That's Tech Field Day, because we have lots of great upcoming Tech Field Day events that you're going to want to take part in. Next week is a big one. Just about a week from now, we're going to be in Cleveland for Tech Field Day Extra at Share. Stephen Foskett has some great presentations coming out of everybody's favorite jewel of Lake Erie. If you want to check out that information, head over to techfieldday.com. Then we're going to take a couple weeks off, let the heat die down a little bit. And then Alistair is going to be back with AI Infrastructure Field Day 3. This is another event that's shaping up to be quite jam-packed with great presentations. And then I'm going to be back at the end of September for the next edition of Security Field Day, because we are excited to hear from companies like 1Password about some of the cool stuff they're doing in the enterprise. So make sure you check out techfieldday.com for the latest on all of the things that we're doing with these events and more. Stay tuned, because you never know when we might sneak one in on you and you won't want to miss any of the action. Just like you don't want to miss any of the action every Wednesday when we publish the rundown. We love recording this for each and every one of you out there, and we love the fact that you get so much of your news from us during the week. Don't forget that you can check out our website to learn more from the show notes. You can also head over to YouTube and watch the videos. So if you want to see me kind of waggling my finger and shaking my head back and forth, if you're more of an audio file, make sure you use your favorite podcast application of choice and subscribe to the Tech Field Day Rundown. And don't forget that we often hang out on a lot of other Future and Group programs, and we have a lot of great videos and podcasts out there that you're going to want to take advantage of. We're going to be back next week to talk about all of the IT news that happened between, well, now and then. But until then, make sure you guys take care of yourselves. Make sure that you are looking out for each other. And we hope that we will see you in the next edition of The Rundown.